The pounding on my door wasn't gentle. It was the kind of knocking that said, "Open up now or we're coming in anyway." I stumbled out of bed, my heart already racing before my feet hit the cold hardwood floor. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed 3:17 a.m. in angry red numbers. Nobody knocks on your door at 3 a.m. with good news. Through the peephole, I saw two police officers standing under my porch light, their breath visible in the February cold. One was tall and broad-shouldered, the other shorter with graying temples. Both looked tired in that way cops do when they've been dealing with people's worst moments all night. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Ma'am, we need to speak with you about an incident involving your sister, Eliza Morrison. The tall officer's voice was steady, professional. Eliza Morrison? My stomach dropped. Eliza, my sister, who I hadn't spoken to in 3 weeks, not since she'd called me crying about her divorce settlement, asking if she could borrow money I didn't have to give. What happened? Is she okay? I asked through the door, my hand already reaching for the deadbolt. Ma'am, we need you to step outside, please. The moment I opened that door, I knew my life was about to change. Not the gradual kind of change you see coming, the violent, earth-shifting kind that leaves you wondering if you ever really knew anything at all. Mara Chen, the shorter officer asked, pulling out a small notebook. Yes, that's me. We received a 911 call approximately 40 minutes ago from your sister, Eliza Morrison. She claims you physically attacked her earlier this evening. The words hit me like ice water. I'm sorry, what? She says you came to her apartment around 10 p.m., forced your way inside, and assaulted her. She has visible injuries consistent with her statement. I stared at them, waiting for the punchline that never came. That's impossible. I was here all night. I haven't seen Eliza in weeks.
The tall officer's expression didn't change. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back. Wait, what? You're arresting me? You're being detained for questioning in connection with a domestic violence incident. The handcuffs were cold against my wrists. 28 years old, and I'd never been arrested for anything worse than a parking ticket. Now I was standing in my pajamas on my own front porch, hands cuffed behind my back, while neighbors' lights started flickering on across the street. That's when I saw her. Eliza emerged from the passenger seat of the patrol car like she was stepping onto a stage. Even in the dim streetlight, I could see the careful way she moved, favoring her left side. Her long blonde hair was disheveled, and there was what looked like a bruise forming around her right eye. She looked fragile, broken, exactly the way she'd looked countless times growing up when she wanted sympathy from our mother. "Mara," she said, her voice catching on my name. Tears glistened on her cheeks. "Why did you do this to me?" I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not just shock anymore. Recognition. "Eliza, what are you doing?" She wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture I recognized from childhood, the same pose she'd struck when Mom told I'd broken her favorite vase, the same way she'd stood when she blamed me for her failed algebra test because I'd been too loud while she was studying. "I trusted you," she whispered, loud enough for the officers to hear. "When you showed up tonight, I thought maybe we could work things out. But you were so angry about Mom's will, and when I wouldn't give you what you wanted—" "What will? Eliza, I don't know what you're talking about." The shorter officer stepped closer. "Ma'am, you'll have an opportunity to give your statement at the station." As they guided me toward the patrol car, I caught sight of the taller officer's vest. A small camera was mounted there, its red recording light blinking steadily in the darkness. That tiny red light was recording everything. Eliza's performance, my confusion, the whole surreal scene playing out on my quiet suburban street.
I didn't know it then, but that little red light was going to save my life. The last thing I saw before they closed the car door was Eliza wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, watching me through the window. For just a moment, when she thought the officers weren't looking, her expression shifted. The tears were still there, but underneath them was something else. Something calculating and cold. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. The interrogation room at the Riverside police station smelled like stale coffee and industrial disinfectant. I sat in a plastic chair that had seen better decades, my hands finally free but still bearing red marks from the handcuffs. Detective Sarah Walsh had kind eyes but a voice that meant business. She sat across from me with a manila folder and a digital recorder, while Officer Grant, the tall one with the body cam, stood near the door. "Let's start from the beginning," Detective Walsh said. "Tell me about your relationship with your sister." Where do you even start with something like that? How do you explain 28 years of sibling rivalry, family dysfunction, and the quiet resentment that builds when one sister gets everything and the other gets blamed for not being grateful enough? "It's complicated," I said finally. "We're not close. Haven't been for years." "Any recent conflicts?" I thought about Eliza's last phone call. How she'd cried about Jason, her ex-husband, and the custody battle over their daughter. How she'd hinted that our mother, Ruth, was finally going to do right by family in her will. "She called me a few weeks ago asking for money. I told her I couldn't help her." Detective Walsh made a note. "How did she respond to that?" "She hung up on me, said I was selfish, just like Mom always said." The words hung in the air between us. Even I could hear how they sounded. Like motive. Like someone might hold a grudge over that kind of rejection. "Mara, your sister says you came to her apartment tonight around 10 p.m. She says you were upset about your mother's estate planning, and when she refused to support your claims to a larger inheritance, you became violent." "That's not true. Any of it." "She has injuries, Mara. A black eye, bruised ribs, scratches on her arms. How do you explain that?" I stared at the table, feeling the walls of the small room closing in. "I can't explain them because I didn't cause them." "She says you've always had anger issues, that your mother, Ruth, can confirm you've been violent before." That hit like a physical blow. Our mother, who'd spent my entire childhood telling me I was too sensitive, too difficult, too much work. Who'd favored Eliza's charm and beauty while making me feel like a consolation prize she'd never wanted to claim. My mother would say whatever Eliza told her to say. Detective Walsh's expression remained neutral, but I caught something flicker across her face. Maybe she had siblings too. Maybe she understood. "Mara, where were you tonight between 9 and 11? "At home. I made dinner, watched Netflix, went to bed around 10:30. "Anyone who can verify that?" "No. I live alone." Another note in her file. Another mark against me. "Mara, your sister is pretty shaken up. She's asking if we can file for a restraining order to keep you away from her and her daughter." The mention of Eliza's 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, made my chest tighten. That little girl adored me. Or at least she had before Eliza started limiting my visits last year. "She's using Sophie as leverage." "Leverage for what?" "I don't know. But Eliza does nothing without an angle." Detective Walsh closed the folder, and I'm going to be honest with you. Without an alibi or witnesses, and with your sister's injuries and testimony, we have enough to hold you. However, given that this is your first offense and the nature of the allegations, we're going to release you tonight with a warning. But if your sister decides to press charges,
"She will," I said quietly. "Whatever she's planning, she's just getting started." Officer Grant spoke for the first time since we'd arrived. "Is there anyone you can call? Someone who can pick you up?" "Kevin, my best friend since college, who'd been telling me for years that my family was toxic and I needed to cut ties completely. Yeah, I can call someone. As I waited for Kevin to arrive, I sat in the lobby watching Eliza give her statement to another detective. Through the glass partition, I could see her gesturing emphatically, dabbing at her eyes with tissues. She looked devastated, traumatized, like someone who'd barely escaped with her life. But I knew my sister. I'd watched her perform for our mother countless times, turning on tears like a faucet when she needed sympathy or wanted someone else to take the blame. The difference was, this time, she wasn't just trying to avoid getting grounded or losing her allowance. This time, she was trying to destroy my life. Kevin arrived at the police station looking like he'd been dragged out of bed by a hurricane. His dark hair stuck up at odd angles, and he was wearing a college sweatshirt inside out over pajama pants. "Are you okay?" were the first words out of his mouth as he pulled me into a hug in the parking lot. No, not even close. On the drive back to my apartment, I told him everything. Eliza's accusations, the injury she claimed I'd caused, the way she looked at me through that patrol car window. "This is insane," Kevin said, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "Even for your family, this is next level crazy. She's planning something bigger. This isn't just about getting me in trouble." "Like what?" I stared out at the empty streets, trying to piece together a puzzle with half the pieces missing. She mentioned Mom's will to the detective, said I was upset about inheritance. "Are you getting anything in your mom's will?" I assumed I wasn't getting anything. Mom's made it pretty clear over the years that Eliza is the favorite. Kevin pulled into my driveway and killed the engine. "Mara, look at me." I turned to face him. Kevin had been my anchor through every family crisis for the past 6 years. He'd seen me cry over Ruth's casual cruelties and Eliza's manipulations more times than I could count. Whatever Eliza is doing, whatever she wants, we're going to figure it out. But right now, I need you to think. Was there anything off about tonight? Anything that doesn't make sense? I closed my eyes, replaying the scene on my front porch. Her injuries. What about them? The bruise around her eye, it was the right color, the right size, but I opened my eyes. She had makeup on. Makeup? It was subtle, but she was wearing foundation, mascara. Who puts on makeup after getting beaten up? Kevin leaned forward. What else? The way she moved. She was favoring her left side like her ribs were injured. But when she got out of the car, she moved normally for a second before she caught herself. Like she forgot she was supposed to be hurt? Exactly. I felt something shift in my chest, like a door opening after being locked for too long. And there's something else. The tall officer, Grant, he had a body camera. So it was recording everything, her performance, my reaction, all of it. Kevin's eyes widened. You think the footage might show something that contradicts her story? I think Eliza got so caught up in her act that she forgot she had an audience she couldn't control. We sat in my car for another few minutes, watching the sun start to rise over the suburban rooftops. Everything looked normal, peaceful, like the kind of place where families had barbecues and kids rode bikes in the street.
Not the kind of place where sisters tried to destroy each other's lives. Kevin? Yeah. When we were kids, Eliza used to practice crying in the mirror. She'd stand there making faces until she could produce tears on command. That's disturbing. I thought it was just weird kid stuff, but now I trailed off, remembering the calculating look in her eyes as they'd put me in the patrol car. I think she's been practicing for this moment her whole life. Kevin reached over and squeezed my hand. Then we're going to have to be smarter than she is. As we walked up to my front door, I made a mental note to call the police station later. I needed to know if I could get access to Officer Grant's body camera footage. Because if Eliza thought she could rewrite history with tears and fake bruises, she was about to learn that some truths refuse to stay buried. Even if she'd been practicing her lies since childhood, the camera doesn't lie. And somewhere in that footage was the evidence that would expose everything she was trying to hide. The call from my mother came at 7:23 a.m., exactly 4 hours after I'd been released from the police station. I was sitting at my kitchen table, still in the same clothes from the night before, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold while Kevin researched body camera laws on his laptop. Mara. Ruth's voice was crisp, businesslike.
not the voice of a mother calling to check if her daughter was okay after being arrested. "We need to talk." "Hi, Mom. I'm fine. Thanks for asking." "Don't be sarcastic with me." "Eliza told me what happened." I felt my jaw clench. Of course she had. "And what exactly did she tell you?" "That you attacked her last night. That you went to her apartment and put your hands on her because you're upset about my estate planning." Estate planning. There it was, the thing Eliza had mentioned to the detective, the piece of this puzzle I'd been missing. "Mom, I didn't attack anyone. I was home all night." "Eliza has pictures, Mara. Bruises, scratches. You did this to her." Pictures. Of course she did. Eliza had always been thorough when she set someone up. Did you see her get those injuries? Did you watch it happen? I don't need to see anything. I know my daughters. I know which one has always had trouble controlling her temper. That old lie. The narrative Ruth had been pushing since we were kids. That I was the difficult one, the angry one, the daughter who couldn't be trusted to behave properly. "What estate planning?" I asked, changing tactics. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, carefully, "That's between me and my attorney." "But Eliza knows about it." "Eliza is my power of attorney. She helps me with my affairs because she cares about family." Kevin looked up from his laptop, catching my expression. He gestured for me to put the call on speaker. "And I don't care about family?" "You moved away 6 hours away the day you turned 18, Mara. You call me twice a year. When have you ever shown interest in anything beyond yourself?" The accusation hit like it always did, even though I knew it was unfair. I'd moved away because staying meant being Ruth's emotional punching bag forever. I called twice a year because every conversation left me feeling like I was drowning. Maybe I'd call more if you didn't spend every conversation telling me what a disappointment I am. There it is. That attitude. That's exactly what Eliza was talking about. What do you mean, what Eliza was talking about? Another pause. Longer this time. "She's been worried about you for months. Says you've been asking strange questions about my will, about what happens to the house when I'm gone. She thinks you're having some kind of breakdown." My blood ran cold. I've never asked Eliza about your will. I've never asked anyone about your will. "But she has the phone records, Mara, the calls you made to my attorney's office." "What calls?" "Mom, I've never called your attorney." But even as I said it, pieces started clicking into place. Eliza was Ruth's power of attorney. She had access to Ruth's mail, her bank accounts, her legal affairs. If someone called pretending to be me, "You're scaring me," Ruth said. And for the first time, she sounded genuinely shaken. "First you attack your sister. Now you're lying about things that are documented. Maybe you do need help." "Mom, listen to me. I think you need to stay away from both of us until you get whatever this is sorted out." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, feeling like I'd just been punched in the stomach. "Jesus," Kevin said quietly. "She really believes it." "Eliza's been planning this for months. She's been setting me up, making me look unstable, obsessed with inheritance." "Why?" "Because if I'm crazy, if I'm violent and delusional, then I can't contest whatever she's convinced Mom to do with her will." Kevin closed his laptop and leaned forward. "Mara, how much money are we talking about here?" "I don't know. Mom owns her house outright. She has her retirement savings, some investments, maybe $500,000 total." "That's enough to kill for." The words hung between us like a physical presence. Because that's what this was, wasn't it? Eliza was trying to kill who I was, destroy my reputation and my relationship with my family so she could inherit everything.
"She's been playing the long game," I said, thinking out loud, "getting power of attorney, isolating me from Mom, building a case that I'm unstable." And last night was what, the final move? Last night was supposed to prove I'm dangerous, violent, the kind of person who can't be trusted with inheritance or family responsibilities. My phone buzzed with a text message, unknown number. "This is Officer Grant from last night. Can you meet me for coffee this afternoon? I have something you need to see."
Kevin read the message over my shoulder. That's the cop with the body camera. Why would he want to meet me? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Maybe because he watched the footage and saw something that doesn't add up. I looked at Kevin, feeling the first spark of hope I'd had since this nightmare started. If that footage shows what I think it shows, then your sister just made the biggest mistake of her life. The coffee shop Officer Grant chose was across town from the police station, the kind of place that attracted college students and freelancers rather than cops. I spotted him immediately, still tall and broad-shouldered, but somehow more approachable in civilian clothes. He was already at a corner table when Kevin and I arrived, a manila envelope sitting beside his untouched coffee. "Miss Chen?" He stood to shake my hand. "Thanks for coming. This is Kevin Park, my friend." Grant nodded, gesturing for us to sit. "I'll get straight to the point. I've been a patrol officer for 12 years. I've seen a lot of domestic violence calls, a lot of family disputes. What happened last night didn't sit right with me." My heart started racing. "What do you mean?" "Your sister's story had holes in it. Small ones, but enough to make me take a closer look at my body cam footage." He slid the envelope across the table. "I made you a copy, unofficially." Kevin and I exchanged glances. "Is that legal?" "The footage is part of the official record now. You have a right to see it, especially if charges are filed. I'm just expediting the process." I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a USB drive and several printed screenshots from the video. "What did you find?" Kevin asked. Grant leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Your sister made some mistakes. Watch the footage, but here's what jumped out at me." He pointed to one of the screenshots. "This was taken when we first arrived on scene, before we knocked on your door." The image was grainy but clear enough. It showed Eliza in the patrol car, illuminated by the overhead light. She was looking in the rearview mirror, touching her face with what looked like, "Is that makeup?" I whispered. "Looks like it to me. She's applying something around her eye area." Grant flipped to another screenshot. This one was taken 3 minutes later, after she got out of the car. In the second image, the bruising around her eye was much more pronounced. She was enhancing the bruise? "That's what it looks like. But that's not all." Grant's expression grew more serious. "When we were walking you to the car, my camera picked up audio from when she thought no one was listening." He pulled out a small digital recorder and pressed play. Eliza's voice, barely above a whisper. "Come on, Mara, just make this easy for everyone." Then clearer, like she was talking to herself. "Should have done this months ago." I felt the blood drain from my face. She's admitting she set me up. That's how I interpreted it, but there's more. After you were in the car, she made a phone call. My camera was still recording. He pressed play again. "Mom, it's done. She bought it completely." "No, she looked shocked. I don't think she suspected anything." "The bruising looks good. Very convincing." "I'll come by tomorrow to sign the papers." Kevin grabbed my arm. "Papers?" Grant stopped the recording. "I did some digging. Your mother filed new estate documents yesterday afternoon. Your sister is now the sole beneficiary." The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too warm. I couldn't breathe properly. She had me arrested the same day Mom changed her will? "It's too convenient to be coincidence," Grant agreed. "Look, I can't tell you what to do with this information, but if I were you, I'd get a lawyer. Soon." I stared at the USB drive like it was a live grenade. "Why are you helping me?" Grant was quiet for a moment. "I have a sister. If she tried to destroy my life for money..." He shrugged. "Let's just say I believe people should face consequences for their actions." "What about your job? Won't you get in trouble for this?" "The footage is part of the official record. You would have gotten it eventually through discovery if this goes to court. I just saved everyone some time." Kevin pocketed the USB drive.
What happens now? Now, you build a case. Because I guarantee your sister isn't done. She got what she wanted with the will, but she'll want to make sure you can't challenge it. As we left the coffee shop, my phone buzzed with another text from an unknown number. I know what you're thinking, but you can't prove anything. Drop this now, and maybe I'll let you visit Sophie sometimes. Keep digging, and you'll lose everything. E. I showed the text to Kevin, who immediately screenshotted it. She's threatening you. She's scared, which means Officer Grant is right. This isn't over. But for the first time since that knock on my door at 3 a.m., I felt like I had a fighting chance. Eliza might have been planning this for months, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd forgotten that lies only work when no one's watching. Attorney Marcus Landry's office was everything I'd hoped for. Floor-to-ceiling law books, mahogany furniture, and the kind of quiet confidence that said he'd seen worse cases than mine and won. Kevin and I sat across from his massive desk while he reviewed Officer Grant's footage on his laptop, occasionally pausing to make notes on a yellow legal pad. "This is extraordinary," he said finally, removing his glasses. "In 30 years of practice, I've rarely seen someone document their own fraud so thoroughly." "So you think we have a case?" "I think your sister handed us a roadmap to her entire scheme." Landry leaned back in his leather chair. "But before we proceed, I need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. Tell me about your family's finances." I explained what I knew about Ruth's assets, the house, her retirement accounts, the small investment portfolio she'd inherited from my father. "And your sister's financial situation?" "I honestly don't know. She's been secretive about money since her divorce." Landry made another note. "I'd like to run a comprehensive background check on Eliza. Financial records, court documents, anything that might explain why she'd go to these lengths." "Isn't that expensive?" "I work on contingency for cases like this. If we recover assets that rightfully belong to you, my fee comes out of that. If we don't win, you don't pay." Kevin leaned forward. "How long does something like this take?" "Depends on what we find, but given that the will was changed yesterday and the alleged assault happened last night, we need to move quickly. Courts don't like coincidences, especially when there's documentation like this." Landry's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and held up a finger. "I need to take this. It's my investigator." While he talked in low tones, Kevin and I exchanged nervous glances. Everything felt surreal. Sitting in a lawyer's office, planning to sue my own family, treating my sister like the criminal she apparently was. "That was interesting," Landry said, hanging up. "My investigator found some preliminary information about your sister. Are you familiar with her gambling habits?"
Mom, it's done. She bought it completely. No, she looked shocked. I don't think she suspected anything. The bruising looks good. Very convincing. I'll come by tomorrow to sign the papers. Kevin grabbed my arm. Papers? Grant stopped the recording. I did some digging. Your mother filed new estate documents yesterday afternoon. Your sister is now the sole beneficiary. The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too warm. I couldn't breathe properly. She had me arrested the same day Mom changed her will. It's too convenient to be coincidence, Grant agreed. Look, I can't tell you what to do with this information, but if I were you, I'd get a lawyer. Soon. I stared at the USB drive like it was a live grenade. Why are you helping me? Grant was quiet for a moment. I have a sister. If she tried to destroy my life for money, he shrugged. Let's just say I believe people should face consequences for their actions. What about your job? Won't you get in trouble for this? The footage is part of the official record. You would have gotten it eventually through discovery if this goes to court. I just saved everyone some time.
Kevin pocketed the USB drive. What happens now? Now you build a case, because I guarantee your sister isn't done. She got what she wanted with the will, but she'll want to make sure you can't challenge it. As we left the coffee shop, my phone buzzed with another text from an unknown number. I know what you're thinking, but you can't prove anything. Drop this now, and maybe I'll let you visit Sophie sometimes. Keep digging, and you'll lose everything. E. I showed the text to Kevin, who immediately screenshotted it. She's threatening you. She's scared, I corrected, which means Officer Grant is right. This isn't over. But for the first time since that knock on my door at 3 a.m., I felt like I had a fighting chance. Eliza might have been planning this for months, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd forgotten that lies only work when no one's watching. Attorney Marcus Landry's office was everything I'd hoped for. Floor-to-ceiling law books, mahogany furniture, and the kind of quiet confidence that said he'd seen worse cases than mine and won. Kevin and I sat across from his massive desk while he reviewed Officer Grant's footage on his laptop, occasionally pausing to make notes on a yellow legal pad. "This is extraordinary," he said finally, removing his glasses. "In 30 years of practice, I've rarely seen someone document their own frauds so thoroughly. So, you think we have a case?" "I think your sister handed us a roadmap to her entire scheme." Landry leaned back in his leather chair. "But before we proceed, I need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. Tell me about your family's finances." I explained what I knew about Ruth's assets, the house, her retirement accounts, the small investment portfolio she'd inherited from my father. "And your sister's financial situation?" "I honestly don't know. She's been secretive about money since her divorce." Landry made another note. "I'd like to run a comprehensive background check on Eliza. Financial records, court documents, anything that might explain why she'd go these lengths." "Isn't that expensive?" "I work on contingency for cases like this. If we recover assets that rightfully belong to you, my fee comes out of that. If we don't win, you don't pay." Kevin leaned forward. "How long does something like this take?" "Depends on what we find. But given that the will was changed yesterday and the alleged assault happened last night, we need to move quickly. Courts don't like coincidences, especially when there's documentation like this." Landry's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and held up a finger. "I need to take this. It's my investigator." While he talked in low tones, Kevin and I exchanged nervous glances. Everything felt surreal. Sitting in a lawyer's office, planning to sue my own family, treating my sister like the criminal she apparently was. "That was interesting," Landry said, hanging up. "My investigator found some preliminary information about your sister. Are you familiar with her gambling habits?"
Gambling? She owes approximately $80,000 to various casinos in Atlantic City. The debt is recent, accumulated over the past 8 months. My mouth fell open. 80,000? There's more. She's 3 months behind on her mortgage, her car was repossessed last week, and she's facing foreclosure proceedings that were filed yesterday morning. Kevin whistled low. "She's broke." "Worse than broke," Landry corrected. "She's financially desperate. The kind of desperate that makes people do extraordinary things." I thought about Eliza's phone call to Ruth, the one Officer Grant had recorded. "I'll come by tomorrow to sign the papers." She needed that inheritance. Not wanted it, needed it. Exactly. And when desperate people face losing everything, they often choose nuclear options. Landry pulled up a calendar on his computer. The question is, how far is she willing to go to protect what she's stolen? As if summoned by his words, my phone buzzed. Text message from Eliza. "Had coffee with Mom this morning. She's very worried about your mental state. Thinks you might need to be hospitalized for evaluation. Psychiatric holds can last 72 hours, you know, long enough for a lot of things to happen." I showed the message to Landry, whose expression darkened. She's escalating. Threatening involuntary commitment? Can she do that? If she can convince a doctor you're a danger to yourself or others, yes, especially if your mother supports the claim. Kevin grabbed my arm. "Mara,
We need to move fast. Landry was already reaching for his phone. I'm filing an emergency motion first thing tomorrow morning. We'll request an injunction to freeze your mother's assets and reverse the will change pending investigation. What about the assault charges? We'll present the body cam evidence to the prosecutor. Once they see what we have, I doubt they'll pursue charges. In fact, they might decide to charge your sister with filing a false police report. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Eliza. Sophie misses her Aunt Mara. Shame if she had to grow up thinking you abandoned her. But maybe that's better than knowing what you really are. This time, Landry read the message over my shoulder. She's using her daughter as leverage now. This woman is... He trailed off, shaking his head. Evil. Desperate people aren't evil, Landry said carefully. They're dangerous. Which is why we need to end this quickly. As we prepared to leave his office, Landry handed me a thick folder, emergency restraining order paperwork. If your sister contacts you again, or if anyone tries to have you committed, call me immediately. Don't go anywhere alone, don't answer your door without knowing who it is, and document everything. You think she'll try something else? I think your sister has invested too much in this scheme to give up easily. She's stolen money, filed false police reports, manipulated your elderly mother, and threatened you multiple times in writing. Landry's expression was grim. People who go that far don't usually stop voluntarily. Walking out of the law office, I felt like I was carrying a live bomb. The folder in my hands contained enough evidence to destroy Eliza's life, just like she tried to destroy mine. But something told me the real battle was just beginning. Because desperate people, as Landry had said, were dangerous, and Eliza Morrison was about to learn exactly how dangerous truth could be. The Riverside County Courthouse was everything I'd imagined and nothing I'd hoped never to see from the defendant's side. High ceilings, dark wood paneling, and that particular smell of old paper and nervous sweat that seemed to cling to every surface. Judge Patricia Haynes presided from her bench like a hawk watching mice, her steel-gray hair pulled back in a bun that looked like it could cut glass. She'd been on the bench for 23 years, according to Landry, and had a reputation for patience with legitimate claims and zero tolerance for theatrics. I sat beside Landry at the defendant's table, wearing the most conservative outfit I owned. Navy blazer, white blouse, pants that Kevin had helped me pick out because my hands were shaking too badly to make decisions about clothes. Across the aisle, Eliza sat with her attorney, Thomas Brennan, a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a men's fashion magazine. Expensive suit, perfect hair, the kind of smile that said he'd never doubted anything in his life. But it was Eliza who commanded attention. She dressed perfectly for the role of victim. Soft gray sweater, minimal makeup that somehow made the fading bruise around her eye look more pronounced, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail that suggested someone too traumatized to care about vanity. The bruise was real. I had to give her credit for that. But knowing how she'd enhanced it for the cameras made my stomach turn. Your Honor, Brennan began, rising smoothly to his feet, my client, Eliza Morrison, is here today not seeking revenge, but protection. Protection from a pattern of escalating violence and harassment that culminated in a brutal assault just 1 week ago. Judge Haynes made a note. Ms. Morrison, please tell the court what happened. Eliza stood slowly, one hand pressed to her ribs like she was still in pain. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, forcing everyone to lean forward to hear her. Your Honor, my sister Mara has always had issues with anger. Growing up, she would lash out when she didn't get her way. Our mother tried to help her, but... She paused, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I thought maybe she'd gotten better. It's been years since we'd had any real problems. What changed? Judge Haynes asked. Our mother's health has been declining. She asked me to help manage her affairs, gave me power of attorney. When Mara found out about some of the decisions we had made together, she lost control. Landry leaned over and whispered, Notice she's not being specific about what decisions? Eliza continued, her voice growing stronger as she built momentum. She came to my apartment last Tuesday night around 10 p.m. She was furious, screaming about inheritance and how her mother favored me. When I tried to calm her down, Eliza's voice broke convincingly.
She hit me multiple times. I have an 8-year-old daughter, Your Honor. She was in the next room listening to all of this. The mention of Sophie made my chest tighten. That little girl didn't deserve to be weaponized in her mother's scheme. She managed to call 911, but by the time police arrived, Mara was already gone. I was terrified to even tell them what happened at first. Judge Haynes looked at me. Miss Chen, you'll have your opportunity to respond. Miss Morrison, do you have any other evidence to present? Brennan approached the bench with a folder. Photos of my client's injuries, Your Honor. Medical records from her emergency room visit. And phone records showing a pattern of harassing calls from the defendant. My blood ran cold. Phone records showing calls I never made. Landry was on his feet immediately. Objection, Your Honor. We've had no opportunity to examine these alleged phone records. Sustained. Mr. Brennan, anything not provided in discovery will not be considered today. Brennan looked annoyed, but nodded. Of course, Your Honor. When it was Ruth's turn to testify, I watched my mother walk to the witness stand with the same measured dignity she carried to church every Sunday of my childhood. She wore a black dress that made her look smaller, frailer than I remembered. Mrs. Chen, Brennan said gently, how would you describe your relationship with your daughters? I love both my girls, Ruth said, her voice steady, but they're very different people. Can you elaborate? Ruth's eyes found mine across the courtroom, and for a moment I saw something flicker there. Regret, sadness, but then her expression hardened. Mara has always been difficult. Even as a child, she had trouble controlling her emotions. She would throw tantrums, break things when she was upset. I hoped she would outgrow it. The lies came so easily to her, reshaping my childhood, erasing the years I'd spent walking on eggshells around her criticism, trying desperately to earn love that always felt conditional. And Eliza? She's always been my helper. When her father died, she stepped up to take care of family responsibilities. She's been my caregiver, my support system.
Have you observed any concerning behavior from Mara recently? Ruth nodded slowly. She's been calling my attorney's office, asking questions about my will, making demands about inheritance. It worried me enough that I asked Eliza to help me review my estate planning. Another lie. I'd never called any attorney. But sitting in that courtroom, listening to my own mother paint me as unstable and greedy, I understood how powerless truth could feel when facing well-rehearsed lies. Mrs. Chen, Brennan continued, in your opinion, do you believe your daughter Mara poses a threat to your family? Landry stood. Objection. Calls for speculation. I'll allow it, Judge Haynes said. Ruth was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her words cut through me like blasts. I'm afraid of what she might do next. Eliza is all I have left now. When Ruth stepped down, I felt like I'd been erased, not just accused of a crime I didn't commit, but written out of my own family history. Landry leaned over and whispered, remember, they've had weeks to prepare their story. We have the truth. Truth is messier, but it's stronger. As the courtroom recessed for lunch, I watched Eliza and Ruth embrace near the back of the courtroom. They looked like a family, mother and daughter, united in their shared trauma. I looked like exactly what they'd painted me to be, the outsider, the problem, the daughter who couldn't be trusted. But tomorrow, Landry who would present our evidence. Tomorrow, Officer Grant's body camera would tell a different story. And sometimes, when lies are built carefully enough, all it takes is one crack to bring down the whole structure. The courtroom felt different on day 2. Maybe it was knowing that Officer Grant sat in the gallery behind me, or maybe it was the flash drive in Landry's briefcase that contained the power to destroy Eliza's carefully constructed lies. Judge Haynes called the session to order, and I could feel the weight of everyone's attention as Landry stood to present our defense. Your Honor, yesterday we heard a compelling story about family dysfunction and sibling violence, but stories, no matter how well told, are not facts. Today, I'd like to present the court with something that cannot lie, cannot be coached, and cannot be manipulated. Video evidence. Brennan was on his feet immediately. Objection, Your Honor. We weren't informed of any video evidence. Your Honor, Landry replied smoothly, This footage is part of the official police record from the night in question. It was recorded on Officer Grant's body camera during the arrest of my client. Judge Haynes considered this. I'll allow it, but Mr. Landry, any evidence not provided in discovery should have been. Understood, Your Honor. Officer Grant only made the footage available to us yesterday, and we immediately filed the appropriate motions. I watched Eliza's face as they wheeled in the large monitor. Her lawyer was whispering urgently in her ear, but she kept her eyes fixed on the screen, her expression carefully neutral. Officer Grant, Landry called, please approach the bench. Grant walked to the witness stand with the same steady confidence he'd shown that night on my doorstep. He wore his dress uniform, medals catching the fluorescent light. Officer Grant, can you describe what we're about to see on this footage? This is unedited video from my body camera starting approximately 15 minutes before we made contact with the defendant, continuing through the arrest and transport. And this camera was recording continuously? Yes, sir. Standard protocol. Landry nodded to the bailiff, who dimmed the courtroom lights. The first few minutes of footage showed Officer Grant and his partner driving to my address, discussing the call they'd received. Nothing dramatic, just two cops doing their job. But then the timestamp showed them arriving at Eliza's apartment first, not mine. Officer Grant, Landry said, pausing the video. Can you explain why you went to Eliza's apartment before proceeding to arrest my client? Standard procedure. We always interview the complainant first to get a detailed statement and assess injuries.
The video resumed, showing Eliza answering her door. She looked disheveled, upset, but I studied her face carefully. The bruising around her eye was visible, but faint. My sister did this to me, she said on camera, touching her face gingerly. She's been threatening me for weeks about our mother's money. Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us to identify the suspect and provide a formal statement. Of course, just let me get my purse. The camera followed her as she walked to her bedroom. What happened next made several people in the courtroom gasp audibly. Eliza, thinking she was out of camera range, stopped at her bathroom mirror and opened a makeup compact. The footage clearly showed her applying what looked like concealer around her eye, but not to cover the bruise, to enhance it. She darkened the edges, made it look more severe, more recent. "Son of a bitch," someone whispered from the gallery. When she returned to the living room, the bruising looked dramatically worse. "I'm ready," she told Officer Grant, her voice shaking with what I now recognized as performance, not trauma. Landry paused the video again. "Officer Grant, did you observe this behavior in real time?" "No, sir. I was in the living room while Miss Morrison gathered her things. I didn't see this until I reviewed the footage later." The video continued, showing the drive to my apartment, then the knock on my door. Watching myself answer in my pajamas, confused and frightened, was surreal. I looked exactly like someone who'd been woken up by police, not someone who spent the evening assaulting her sister. But the most damning moment came after they'd put me in the patrol car. The camera was still recording when Eliza made her phone call. "Mom, it's done. She bought it completely. No, she looked shocked. I don't think she suspected anything. The bruising looks good, very convincing. I'll come by tomorrow to sign the papers." The courtroom was dead silent except for the sound of Ruth's sharp intake of breath. When the video ended, Judge Haynes was quiet for a long moment. "Ms. Morrison, can you explain what we just witnessed?" Eliza stood slowly, but for the first time since this whole nightmare began, she looked rattled. The careful composure was cracking. "Your Honor, the lighting in that video is very poor. It's hard to tell what—" "Miss Morrison, the audio is quite clear. You told someone named Mom that it's done and that you would come by tomorrow to sign papers. Can you explain what papers you were referring to?" Brennan put his hand on Eliza's arm, clearly trying to signal her to stop talking, but she was beyond coaching now. I was confused. I'd just been attacked. I wasn't thinking clearly."
The footage shows you enhancing your injuries with makeup after telling police your sister had assaulted you. How do you explain this discrepancy? Eliza's mask finally slipped completely. The vulnerable victim disappeared, replaced by someone cold and angry. "She deserved it," she said, pointing at me. "Do you know what she's had her whole life? Everything handed to her, while I had to fight for scraps. She never cared about family, never helped with Mom, never did anything but judge us from her perfect little life." "Miss Morrison," Brennan tried to interrupt, but she was past listening. "She doesn't deserve a penny of Mom's money. I'm the one who's been there. I'm the one who's sacrificed everything. So yes, I made sure she wouldn't be able to take that away from us."
Judge Haynes banged her gavel as the courtroom erupted in whispers. "Miss Morrison, you've just confessed to filing a false police report and committing fraud. Mr. Brennan, I suggest you advise your client to remain silent." But it was too late. Eliza had just unraveled her entire scheme on the record, in front of a judge, with court reporters capturing every word. Looking at my sister's face, I realized that the desperate girl who'd always needed to be the center of attention had finally gotten exactly what she'd always wanted. Everyone was looking at her. Unfortunately for Eliza, it wasn't the kind of attention she'd been hoping for. The aftermath of Eliza's courtroom confession felt like watching a building collapse in slow motion. Judge Haynes called for a recess, but the damage was done. My sister had just admitted to filing false police reports and defrauding our elderly mother on the public record. When court resumed an hour later, Ruth sat in the front row behind Eliza's table, her face pale and drawn. For the first time since this nightmare began, she looked every one of her 73 years. Landry stood to address the court with a thick folder in his hands. "Your Honor, in light of Miss Morrison's admission, I'd like to present additional evidence that shows this conspiracy extends beyond false police reports to elder abuse and financial fraud." Brennan looked like he'd aged a decade during the recess. "Your Honor, my client was clearly emotional and misspoke. We request that her previous statements be stricken from the record." Judge Haynes fixed him with a stare that could have frozen fire. "Mr. Brennan, your client didn't misspeak. She confessed. I'm denying your motion." Landry approached the bench with his folder. "Your Honor, these are financial records obtained through legitimate discovery. They show a pattern of financial manipulation spanning the past 8 months. He handed copies to the judge and to Brennan, then turned to address the courtroom. Ruth Chen granted power of attorney to her daughter Eliza Morrison in March of this year. Since then, over $120,000 has been transferred from Mrs. Chen's accounts to accounts controlled by Miss Morrison. I heard Ruth make a small sound of distress from the gallery. Furthermore, Landry continued, Mrs. Chen's will was changed yesterday, the same day Miss Morrison filed her false police report, removing Mara Chen as beneficiary and making Eliza Morrison the sole heir to an estate valued at approximately $500,000. Judge Haynes reviewed the documents. Mr. Landry, are you alleging that Mrs. Chen was unaware of these financial transfers? I'm alleging that Mrs. Chen was systematically deceived about the purpose and extent of these transfers, Your Honor. Miss Morrison used her power of attorney to redirect funds meant for household expenses and medical care to cover her personal debts. He gestured to the gallery. Mrs. Chen, would you please approach the bench? Ruth stood slowly, looking confused and fragile. As she walked to the witness stand, I saw her differently than I had in years. Not as the cold, critical mother who'd made my childhood miserable, but as an elderly woman who'd been manipulated by someone she trusted. Mrs. Chen, said Landry gently, were you aware that your daughter Eliza owes $87,000 in gambling debts? Ruth's face went white. Gambling debts? Were you aware that she's facing foreclosure on her home? No, she said she was managing fine after the divorce. Mrs. Chen, did you authorize the transfer of $12,000 last month to Atlantic City Casino? What? No, I don't gamble. Landry handed her a bank statement. This shows a wire transfer from your account to pay off a portion of your daughter's casino debt. The memo line says medical expenses. Ruth stared at the paper like it was written in a foreign language. She told me this was for a specialist, for Sophie's physical therapy. Mrs. Chen, your granddaughter Sophie receives physical therapy through her school district. There are no additional medical expenses. I watched my mother's face crumble as the scope of Eliza's deception became clear.
For the first time in my adult life, I felt sorry for her. "Mrs. Chen," said Judge Haynes quietly, "did you understand what you were signing when you changed your will yesterday?"
Eliza said, Ruth's voice was barely audible, she said Mara was trying to have me declared incompetent, that she wanted to take control of my finances. She said if I didn't protect the family assets, Mara would squander everything. And you believed this? Ruth looked across the courtroom at me, and I saw something I'd never seen before in her eyes. Regret. Eliza has been my caretaker for months. She helps with my medications, drives me to appointments, handles my bills. When she told me Mara was threatening our family, I trusted her. "Mrs. Chen," Landry said carefully, "do you now understand that your daughter Eliza has been stealing from you?" Ruth nodded, tears streaming down her face. "How much?" "Over $100,000. The number hit her like a physical blow. She swayed in the witness chair, and the bailiff stepped forward to steady her. From the defendant's table, Eliza finally lost the last of her composure. "Don't you dare act like the victim now," she shouted at Ruth. "You never cared about anyone but yourself. You made our lives hell and then acted surprised when we needed help." "Miss Morrison," Judge Haynes banged her gavel, "you will remain seated and silent." But Eliza was beyond control now, turning her fury on me. "And you, Miss Perfect, living your little independent life, judging us from your ivory tower. You think you're so much better than us, but you're just a coward who ran away the first chance you got." "Eliza, please," Ruth whispered from the witness stand. "Please what, Mom? Please pretend this is all my fault? Please act like you spent 30 years telling me I was the only daughter who mattered? You created this situation." Judge Haynes had heard enough. "Mr. Brennan, control your client or I'll hold her in contempt." But the damage was done. Eliza had just destroyed the last bridge between herself and Ruth, ensuring that even if she somehow avoided criminal charges, she'd lost her greatest ally. Ruth stepped down from the witness stand and walked slowly back to the gallery. But instead of sitting behind Eliza's table, she crossed the aisle and sat behind mine. When our eyes met, she mouthed 2 words I'd never expected to hear from her. "I'm sorry." It wasn't enough to erase 28 years of emotional manipulation and favoritism, but it was a start. As court adjourned for the day, I watched bailiffs escort Eliza out in handcuffs. She'd be spending the night in jail while they sorted out charges for elder abuse, financial fraud, and filing false police reports. Ruth sat alone in the front row, staring at her hands. "Mom?" I said softly, approaching her. She looked up, and for the first time in my adult life, my mother looked small and vulnerable, instead of intimidating. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered. "We'll figure it out," I said, surprising myself, one step at a time. Because despite everything, the lies, the manipulation, the years of feeling like I was never good enough, Ruth was still my mother. And unlike Eliza, she was finally ready to face the truth about what our family had become. 3 weeks later, I sat in the same courtroom where my sister had tried to destroy my life, waiting for Judge Haynes to deliver her final ruling. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, casting everything in a golden light that felt almost hopeful. Eliza wasn't there. She was in county jail, awaiting trial on charges of elder abuse, financial fraud, filing false police reports, and theft. Bail had been set at $50,000, money she didn't have thanks to her gambling debts and the frozen assets from Ruth's estate. Ruth sat beside me in the front row, her hands folded in her lap. Over the past 3 weeks, we'd had more honest conversations than we'd managed in the previous decade. They weren't easy conversations. There were tears, accusations, and moments when I wondered if some relationships were too damaged to repair. But we were trying. That had to count for something.
Kevin sat on my other side, wearing the same suit he'd worn to his college graduation. He'd taken time off work every day of the proceedings, never once complaining about the lost income or the hours spent in uncomfortable courtroom chairs.
Before I deliver my ruling, Judge Haynes began, I want to address the serious nature of what we've witnessed in this courtroom. This case represents not just a family dispute, but a systematic pattern of fraud, manipulation, and abuse that strikes at the heart of our legal system's ability to protect vulnerable citizens. She looked directly at me. Ms. Chen, the charges against you are hereby dismissed with prejudice. The evidence clearly shows that you were the victim of an elaborate scheme designed to discredit you and deprive you of your rightful inheritance. Relief flooded through me like a physical force. I'd known it was coming. Landry had been confident after Eliza's courtroom breakdown, but hearing it made official felt like exhaling after holding my breath for weeks. Furthermore, Judge Haynes continued, I'm ordering the immediate reversal of Mrs. Ruth Chen's will change, as it was executed under false pretenses and fraudulent circumstances. The estate planning documents signed on the day of the alleged assault are hereby voided. Ruth squeezed my hand. 3 weeks ago, I would have pulled away. Today, I squeezed back. Mrs. Chen, the judge addressed my mother, I'm recommending that you work with Elder Services to establish safeguards for your finances going forward. While you've revoked your daughter's power of attorney, I want to ensure you have proper protections in place. Yes, Your Honor, Ruth said quietly. I've already spoken with a financial advisor about setting up oversight accounts. Judge Haynes made a few final notes. Ms. Morrison will face criminal trial for her actions. The evidence presented in this courtroom will be forwarded to the district attorney's office for prosecution. As we stood for the judge's exit, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Vindication. Not just legal vindication, but the deeper kind that comes from having truth acknowledged after being gaslit for so long. Outside the courthouse, Landry shook my hand with the satisfaction of someone who'd just won a case that mattered. The DA's office called this morning. They're offering Eliza a plea deal, 3 years for the financial crimes if she admits guilt and agrees to make restitution. Will she take it? Her new attorney seems to think so. The alternative is going to trial and facing up to 7 years if convicted on all counts. 3 years. It seemed both too little and too much. Too little for the trauma she'd put us through, too much for a sister I'd once shared childhood secrets with. What about restitution? Ruth asked. She'll have to pay back everything she stole, plus interest and penalties. It'll likely take her years, but it's better than nothing. Kevin and I walked Ruth to her car, a conversation we'd never imagined having just a month ago. Mara, she said, pausing with her hand on the door handle, I know I can't undo the things I said about you, the way I let Eliza manipulate me into believing. Mom, we've talked about this. No, let me finish. Her voice was stronger now, more like the woman who'd raised 2 daughters and survived my father's death. I failed you, not just these past few months, but for years. I let my favoritism blind me to what was really happening. I looked at this woman who'd been both my greatest critic and my first teacher about unconditional love, or the lack of it. I failed too, I said finally. I ran away instead of fighting for our relationship. Maybe if I'd stayed, if I'd tried harder. No, Ruth's voice was firm. You protected yourself. That took strength, not weakness. It was the first time she'd ever told me I was strong. We hugged awkwardly in the courthouse parking lot, 2 people learning how to be mother and daughter again after years of being strangers. As Kevin and I drove away, I pulled out my phone and deleted Eliza's contact information. All the threatening texts, the manipulative calls, the years of drama and obligation, gone with a few taps. How do you feel? Kevin asked. I considered the question seriously. Free? Scared? Angry? Relieved? Like I just survived something I didn't know I could survive.
That's very specific. It's very complicated.
We drove in comfortable silence for a while, past the suburban neighborhoods where this whole nightmare had started. My house, the one Eliza had tried to turn into a crime scene, came into view. "Want to celebrate?" Kevin asked. "Dinner somewhere expensive where we pretend to be fancy people?" "Actually, I want to go home, order pizza, sit on my couch in my pajamas, and watch terrible reality TV." "That sounds perfect." Because it was perfect. My house, my couch, my choice about what to watch and when to go to bed. Simple freedoms that I'd almost lost to my sister's lies. That evening, as Kevin dozed on the other end of the sofa and some cooking competition played on the TV, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The 3 a.m. knock, the handcuffs, the humiliation of being arrested for something I didn't do. But also Officer Grant's integrity in sharing the footage, Landry's skill in building our case, Kevin's unwavering loyalty, Ruth's courage in admitting she'd been wrong, and my own refusal to give up, even when everything seemed hopeless. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Aunt Mara, it's Sophie. Mom said I can't see you anymore, but I wanted you to know I don't believe what she said about you. I love you." I stared at the message, my heart breaking for an 8-year-old, caught in the wreckage of her mother's choices. I couldn't respond. Any contact could be used against me in custody proceedings, but I screenshotted the message and saved it. Someday, when Sophie was older and could make her own decisions, I'd tell her that I never stopped loving her either. For now, though, I was content to sit in my own house, surrounded by the quiet peace of a life built on truth instead of lies. Outside, the suburban neighborhood settled into another ordinary evening. Families had dinner, kids did homework, dogs barked at passing joggers. Normal life, the kind Eliza had tried to steal from me. But truth, it turns out, is harder to kill than most people think. And sometimes when you refuse to let lies define you, you discover that you're stronger than anyone, including yourself, ever imagined. The nightmare was over. My real life could finally begin. 6 months later, I stood in Ruth's kitchen helping her sort through decades of paperwork. It had become our Saturday ritual, me driving the 3 hours to her house, spending the weekend helping her organize the financial chaos Eliza had left behind. "I found another credit card statement," Ruth said, holding up an envelope like it might bite her. "One I didn't know existed." "What's the balance?" $12,000. She sat heavily in the kitchen chair where she'd eaten breakfast for 40 years. "How did I not know she'd opened accounts in my name?" I took the statement and added it to the growing pile. 7 months of forensic accounting had revealed the true scope of Eliza's theft. Not just the $120,000 we'd discovered during the trial, but another $60,000 in credit card debt, fraudulent loans, and forged checks. "Because she was smart about it," I said, sitting across from her. "She knew exactly how to exploit your trust." Ruth had aged in the months since the trial, but in a different way than before. The rigid control she'd maintained for decades had softened into something more human. She looked tired, but not bitter. Sad, but not defeated. "I keep thinking about Sophie," she said quietly. "She's been in foster care for 3 months now while they sort out custody." Sophie, the 8-year-old caught in the wreckage of her mother's choices. Eliza had lost parental rights when she'd been sentenced to 3 years in state prison. Jason, Sophie's father, had petitioned for full custody, but the courts were moving slowly. "Have you heard anything from the caseworker?" "Jason's lawyer called yesterday. They think Sophie might be able to come home next month." Home to her father, who'd moved back from Colorado specifically to care for his daughter. It wasn't the family Sophie had known, but it was better than the uncertainty she'd been living with. That's good news. I asked if I could see her for supervised visits. Ruth's voice was careful, like she was afraid to hope. The caseworker said maybe, if Jason agrees. "And?" "He said yes. He doesn't blame me for what Eliza did,
says Sophie needs her grandmother now more than ever. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. These small gestures of affection still felt new between us, but they were getting easier. You're going to be a good grandmother to her, Mom. Better than... I paused, choosing my words carefully. Better than you were able to be before. Ruth's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. I don't know how to be different than I was. You're already different. You're here, sorting through this mess instead of pretending it didn't happen. You're taking responsibility instead of making excuses. That's different. We worked in comfortable silence for another hour, organizing statements and building files for the restitution case that would probably drag on for years. Eliza would pay back what she'd stolen, but it would take decades at her prison wages. Mara, Ruth said, as I was packing up my papers, I want to ask you something, but I don't want you to feel obligated. Okay. When Sophie comes home, when she's ready for visitors, would you consider being part of her life again? I know Eliza poisoned that relationship, but Sophie always loved you, and she's going to need all the family support she can get. I thought about the text message Sophie had sent me the night of the trial, the one I'd saved but never been able to answer. I'd like that. When she's ready. Good. Ruth smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached her eyes. She asks about you, when I talk to her caseworker. What does she ask? Whether you're okay, whether you're still angry about what happened. I told her you're stronger than any of us realized. That evening, I drove home through the familiar countryside, thinking about strength and forgiveness, and the strange ways families can break apart and rebuild themselves. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. How's your mom? Kevin asked without preamble. Better? Different? We found more credit card debt. Jesus. How much more? $12,000. But we're handling it. You know what I noticed? What? You said we. 6 months ago, you couldn't say my mother without gritting your teeth. He was right. Somewhere between the courthouse and today, Ruth had stopped being my adversary and become my responsibility. Not in the suffocating way Eliza made herself Ruth's responsibility, but in the healthier way adults care for aging parents. I got a call from Officer Grant yesterday. Oh? He's teaching a class at the police academy about body camera evidence and domestic violence calls. Asked if I'd be willing to speak to recruits about false accusations. Are you going to do it? I considered the question as I unlocked my front door. I think so. If it helps one person avoid what I went through, it's worth it. Look at you becoming an advocate. Don't get carried away. I'm just telling my story. But as I hung up and settled into my evening routine, I realized Kevin was right. I was becoming something different than I'd been before this nightmare started. Not just a survivor, but someone who could use her survival to help others. 2 weeks later, I stood in front of 35 police recruits, telling them about the importance of thorough investigation and unbiased evidence gathering, about how body cameras could protect both victims and the accused, about the difference between real trauma and performed victimhood.
The hardest part, I told them, wasn't being arrested. It was realizing that people I loved were capable of destroying me for money. But the second hardest part was learning to trust the system to find the truth, even when that truth was complicated and messy. After the presentation, a young recruit approached me. My sister has been acting strange lately, she said quietly, asking about our grandmother's finances, suggesting she needs more help than she's getting. After hearing your story, trust your instincts, I told her, and document everything. Photos, recordings, witnesses. The truth has a way of revealing itself if you give it enough light. Driving home that night, I thought about how far I'd come from the woman who'd opened her door at 3 a.m. to find police on her doorstep. That woman had been passive, reactive, overwhelmed by her family's dysfunction. This woman, the one I was becoming, was different. Stronger, yes, but also more intentional about the relationship she chose to maintain and the boundaries she chose to enforce.
I still visited Ruth every other weekend. I was still planning to rebuild a relationship with Sophie when she was ready. I was still angry about the months of fear and uncertainty Eliza had put me through. But I was no longer defined by any of it. I was just Mara, a woman who'd survived her sister's betrayal, helped her mother heal from decades of manipulation, and learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to let other people's lies become your truth. The nightmare was over. My real life, messy, complicated, honest, and entirely my own, had finally begun. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.